Back in 1953, when people in Hollywood were really scared of anything connected to communism, Lucille Ball's name showed up in some government investigation files. All because of one old piece of paper from 1936 that showed how she had registered to vote. That one little mistake was enough to almost destroy the giant TV business she had worked so hard to build. The people paying for her show got nervous and scared. Newspapers ran big dramatic headlines about it. Regular people watching at home were totally shocked. The woman who made millions of people laugh every single week on their TVs had suddenly become someone the government was suspicious of. It was the most paranoid and crazy time in modern American history. One young mistake almost burned down everything she had built. But honestly, that was just one of many times in her life when Lucille Ball had to walk the line between two totally opposite worlds, one bright and happy, one dark and painful. On the TV show called I Love Lucy, she played a character named Lucy Ricardo. Lucy Ricardo was clumsy, loud, and absolutely impossible to stop. But in real life, Lucille was something completely different. She was a little girl who lost her dad when she was only 3 years old. She was a wife who got cheated on for years and years. She was a woman who had to clench her teeth, push through all that pain, and somehow turn it into perfectly timed comedy that made the whole country laugh. She controlled every single thing on her show, every camera shot, every laugh, every moment. But she could never control the broken pieces inside her own family. Lucille Ball did not just make a TV show. She completely changed how American television worked and became one of the very few women running a studio at that time. She took on projects everyone said were stupid and crazy and turned them into history. Her talent was absolutely brilliant and burned so bright. But the price she paid for all of it was years and years of loneliness hiding behind that spotlight. All of America loved Lucy the character. But did anyone actually stop and really see Lucille the real person? Lucille Ball grew up in a small town called Jamestown in New York. It was the kind of place where life moved really slowly. The streets all looked the same, and the seasons just changed one after another without much happening in between. She was born on August 6, 1911, in a quietness so total that everything seemed like it was already decided before it even started. But her early life was actually shaped more by constant moving around than by any kind of stability or routine. Her father worked in the telephone business, and that job kept moving the whole family from town to town when she was really little. Houses kept showing up and then disappearing behind them. Towns barely had enough time to feel familiar before the family had to leave them behind again. That little girl grew up always feeling like she was stuck between two places. Like she had just arrived somewhere but was already getting ready to leave again. Nothing ever lasted long enough to actually grow roots. Familiar faces barely had time to stick in her memory before she was somewhere new with someone different. The changes were never loud or dramatic. They were just constant, like a quiet beat underneath everything that her body had to learn how to deal with. Then one day all that moving around stopped completely and without any warning. Her father died from typhoid fever when Lucy was still just a tiny child. There is no clear memory of exactly what happened that day, only little broken pieces of it. The house suddenly felt very still and quiet. The grown-ups started talking in lower voices. Doors started closing more often than before. And there was this long, heavy silence that nobody ever gave a name to. Death was never explained to her in actual words. But it was everywhere. You could feel it in how the adults moved around. You could see it in how their eyes avoided looking at each other. You could feel it in how the air inside the house had completely changed. After that, her mother took both kids back to New York to go live with their grandparents. That new house was nothing like all the places they had passed through before. It was solid and steady, and it ran on very strict rules. Fixed schedules every single day. Words measured carefully. Proper behavior expected from everyone. Adults worked hard. Children did what they were told. Everything was held tightly together so that nothing would ever fall apart again in that house. Art was not something they told you not to do. But it also was not something anyone encouraged either. There was no stage, no one pushing her to perform, no invitation to try anything creative. Days passed in this steady rhythm of discipline and self-control. Emotions were allowed to exist, but they were never made bigger than they needed to be. Everything had to stay at just the right level so that life would not get disturbed any more than it already had. Lucy grew up in that kind of atmosphere. She learned to watch carefully before doing anything. She got used to staying quiet when she was not sure about something. Feelings did not disappear inside that house. They just stayed behind, kept locked up, never let out through words or actions. Laughter did not ring out loud very often in that house. When it did show up, it was soft and quiet, just enough to make a heavy moment feel a little lighter, and then it faded away fast like it had never been there at all. Her first times performing in front of people came through small school shows and simple community activities. No professional lights, no big fancy stage, just an open space and a few pairs of eyes looking her way. They were short little moments, but they felt completely different from regular daily life. No explanations needed, no asking permission from anyone, just step forward and do your part. The people watching kept their eyes on her a little longer than usual. Not with curiosity exactly, not with judgment either, just simply looking. And in those short minutes something became really clear. She was not a child squeezing herself into a mold trying to fit. She was not someone standing at the edge of adult conversations trying not to be noticed. She was just a person standing in an open space and being recognized for exactly who she was. The moment passed fast. The show ended. Everyone went back to where they belonged, and the house went back to its quiet, steady rhythm. But that feeling did not go away. It stayed with her like a thin little line of light. Just enough to make her understand the difference between two completely different worlds. One world where she had to keep adjusting herself just to survive. And another world where simply showing up was enough to belong. Those years did not give her one specific dream to chase. They did not open up a clear road with a sign pointing the way. What stayed with her instead was just a feeling that hung around for a long, long time. She had to find a place where her presence would not just pass by and disappear without anyone noticing. Not to stand out and be famous, but also not to be left forgotten at the edges either. Every single time she stepped in front of other people, even in the tiniest little performances, that empty feeling inside her got filled up for a little while. The eyes looking at her stayed longer. The sounds around her slowed down and held their rhythm. Her body stood still right at the center of one very short moment. And then
everything closed back up again and sent her right back to the familiar, controlled, disciplined rhythm she had always known. In late 1929, Lucille Ball arrived in New York City while the city was still trying to recover from the big economic crash that had just happened. Her first job was not acting at all, but modeling instead. She worked for a fashion house owned by a woman named Hattie Carnegie. She appeared in fashion shows, stood under the lights of store windows, and learned how to hold her body and her eyes just right in a space where someone was always watching her. Every photo shoot, every walk down the runway could either be an opportunity or the very last time anyone called her name. Alongside that work, she spent hours taking classes at the John Murray Anderson School for Dramatic Arts, a narrow rehearsal room with mirrors all along the walls. Her voice adjusted beat by beat, her footsteps placed down exactly right. Auditions happened with small Broadway groups, mostly just in the chorus line. Her name showed up on long lists of replacements, stepping in only when someone else was needed, and then stepping back out again when the show ended. Nobody waiting for her, nobody holding her back. Sometimes the feedback was really blunt and direct. Not enough personality, hard to put at the center. Not the kind of face people would remember for very long. The working rhythm she had started to build got suddenly interrupted when she got sick with rheumatic fever and had to stop working for a long time. When she came back, her old position was gone. The group she had been with had already replaced her, and everything felt more crowded than before. She had to start all over again from scratch, while other people had already moved further ahead. Hollywood appeared as another direction she could try. She got placed among a group called the Golden Girls, female faces standing in group scenes, walking across the frame. They're just barely enough so the bigger picture would not look empty. From there she got into the RKO system and started getting one small role after another. In movies like Stage Door and Five Came Back, her name showed up in the cast list and then disappeared again when the project was done. The work was steady, but it never kept anyone around for long. Inside that cycle, a label started sticking to her. They called her the Queen of the B-movies. One film after another, one contract after another, no major roles, no time to build a real image that people would actually remember. The studio became a kind of school for her. Standing in the right light, waiting for the camera to start rolling, adjusting her face to fit whatever the frame needed. Stumbles, slips, and missed beats stopped being hidden and instead got slowly left right there in the scene. Her body started reacting faster than her actual dialogue, and laughter started coming out of those offbeat moments. Every film was a test. Every scene was an adjustment. When to stop moving. When to move again. When to let a pause stretch out just half a second longer than expected. All of it learned directly on the actual set. In the middle of actually doing the work with nobody giving her clear instructions about any of it. Then the job ended, the contract ran out, and she went back to waiting around for the next project. Radio opened up a completely different kind of space for her. No lights, no big movements across a stage, just voice and pause. A show called My Favorite Husband slowly pulled in more and more listeners. The studio became a place where timing had to be held tighter than it had ever been before. Everything depended on the exact right moment of speaking. On the silence, sitting just before a line finished. On the back-and-forth reflex between actors when there was no camera frame to lean on. The show aired regularly, and listeners started getting used to that voice. Recording sessions followed each other in the same space with the same microphones fixed in their spots. The same rhythm repeated over and over until her body just remembered where to stand on its own without even thinking about it. Behind the scenes, CBS started paying attention to her. Not because of any big starring role, but because of her ability to hold timing perfectly. Precise, exact, never too much and never too little. New York, Hollywood, radio. None of these places ever held on to her for very long. Work just followed more work. Environments kept changing and she had to adjust her methods along with them. Finishing at the studio, another shooting schedule was already sitting there waiting. Leaving the set, another recording session had already begun. There was no pause ever long enough to stop and look back at where she had been. She just kept showing up whenever her name was called, stepped into position, finished the scene, and stepped away again before the crew had even moved on to the next task. The studio lights came on. The audience sat close to the stage. Cameras got set into their positions at multiple fixed angles. When the show first started taking shape, nothing about it felt certain or safe. CBS was hesitant about putting Desi Arnaz next to Lucille Ball on television. They were worried that a real married couple in real life would not appeal to what audiences wanted to see. The whole structure of the show, the way it would be filmed, the rhythm of how stories would be told, all of it got questioned. Lucy did not back down or give in. She held her ground on who would be cast. She defended a format built around married life. And she kept pushing the project forward until it finally got accepted. The first recordings were done differently from almost every other TV show happening at that time. Instead of just being broadcast live and then gone forever, cameras rolled on actual 35mm film. Multiple camera angles ran all at the same time. The audience sat directly inside the studio itself. Actors spoke their lines, reacted to each other, paused for half a beat, and laughter just erupted out of the crowd. Then the scene moved forward. That rhythm repeated from episode to episode, and it became the familiar structure that people would later know as the sitcom. Before that, television had mostly been something that happened live and then disappeared the moment the broadcast ended. From this point on, it worked more like a production line, something that could be recorded, stored, and played again whenever needed. The show shot straight up to the top of the ratings almost immediately. Every week, viewers turned on their televisions at the exact same hour and came back to the same space, the same familiar situations, the same faces they had grown to love. Episodes got preserved, rebroadcast, then aired again in different time slots. The production schedule stretched out into a steady cycle. Reading the script, rehearsing, filming, editing, broadcasting, and then starting all over again for the next episode. There were no long breaks ever. Only more work following right behind the last work. Script pages turning. A stage manager running in with timing signals. A camera shifting back half a step. Her adjusting her position just slightly. A hand touching the edge of a table, straightening a prop, glancing toward the camera on the left. A line spoken softly, just to test how the rhythm felt. Lights up. Scene continued. In 1953, her name showed up in a hearing connected to